Hello, I'm sitting next to Miss Caroline Larrington, who wrote the book Winter is Coming, which is all about the historical background of the Game of Thrones universe. The German edition will be released as a Thais book in autumn later this year. Ms. Larrington, thank you for being here today.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. Let's start with a rather broad question. What do you think? Why is Game of Thrones such an immense success all over the world?
I think it's because it combines an interest in the mythic stories which people are always interested in, the lost child, the rise and fall of the kingdom, with a really detailed understanding of how medieval historical societies work. And I think that's where Martin outshines everybody else. Some would say even Tolkien, in terms of the depth of his imagination and his historical understanding.
Yeah, I see. Is that the reason why you decided to write about his world and not Tolkien's world?
Yeah, I'm not really that keen on Tolkien,
okay,
I have to say. But I decided to write about this world because whenever I watched the show and when I started reading the books, I kept recognizing things which I knew from my own understanding of medieval history and medieval literature too. And when I talked to other medieval scholars who watched the show, we would get very excited about identifying parallels, not necessarily sources. I don't know that Martin has read all the things that I have read, but he certainly has read a great deal, and he's brought this to the book series, and the showrunners have brought it, the same kind of understanding, to the TV too. And so I became very excited about the idea of uncovering the kinds of real-life parallels and the kinds of imaginary parallels as well, which existed in the medieval world and which seemed to deepen my enjoyment of the show when I think about them.
Okay, your enjoyment. Do you enjoy any culture or any faction in that universe, especially? Something like your favorite faction there?
Well, I'm very keen on the Ironborn, and I was rather sad when they vanished in season 5, almost completely. One of the things I do a lot of research on is on Vikings and on Scandinavian literature, and I know a great deal about medieval Iceland, which comes over in the book in some ways. So I'm interested to see the ways in which the Ironborn are very much like the Vikings, and how they have a religion, the religion of the drowned god, which is a little bit like what the religion, the cult of Odin or Wotan in German would have been like.
I see.
And a version of Valhalla, of Valhall, which is underwater and where there are mermaids instead of Valkyria. And I'm very interested in the way that those are transposed to really emphasize the seagoing nature of that culture.
All right. Do you have anything? Sometimes it's said that Game of Thrones, the depiction of violence in Game of Thrones is a little bit harsh. Is it true to the actual medieval background, or would you say it is rather exaggerated?
I think it probably is true to the medieval background, but I think we don't see this in Hollywood productions of medieval stories. We don't see it even in contemporary medieval writing. Those kinds of things are left unsaid. But if you look at what chroniclers have to say about the behavior of the English in the 100 Years' War, for example, how they would just land in France and burn all the crops, kill all the peasants that they came across, kill the cows, poison the wells, all those kinds of things, to terrorize the population, not because they were looking for the French army. They didn't care where the French army was. They just wanted to do this damage. And I think that kind of cruelty is very typical of the medieval period, but we airbrush it out of our contemporary understanding. So I think Martin has that right.
Okay. And what is it about Game of Thrones that you think is interesting that is not based upon medieval history?
I think the most interesting thing for me is the depiction or the thinking up of the extraordinary creatures who are the White Walkers or the others in the book series. They're so much like, in some ways, like the frost giants of Norse mythology, and they're covered in icicles. They have these icy eyes. They crackle as they walk. And they have a culture and a language as we understand it, but we just don't know what they want. We don't know how they can be appeased or how they can be defeated. We might guess the dragons are going to play a role in this, the fire that will oppose the ice. And now in the TV show, at least, we have an origin story for them. But it's quite hard to see how we get from that origin to the kind of depthless hatred they seem to have for humanity, and why it is that they've turned in this way on all the humans south of the wall. So I find them endlessly fascinating, and I have no idea how that's going to turn out. Okay,
which leads to the last question. Assuming George R. R. Martin keeps on modelling his story based on real life history, can you make any guess what could possibly happen next?
Well, my theory is, as a literary scholar, that what A Song of Ice and Fire really is a kind of epic.
Yeah.
And that it's heading for an epic ending, and that means that somebody will win the Iron Throne.
Yeah.
Somebody has to do that, I think. And there will be a wedding, there'll be a new dynasty founded. I think it's quite likely that Jon Snow is going to marry Daenerys, even if technically she's his aunt.
All right.
Which is kind of complicated, but then Brunhilde was Siegfried's aunt, and that didn't stop them exactly. But I also think it's quite possible that although this particular storyline will end with the wedding and the happy ever after, that there are more stories to be told in this universe. It's such a rich and widely spread place that the stories of the people in Essos, for example, remain to be told. Or what happens next among the Ironborn? Is their only role to put Daenerys on the throne? No, there are all sorts of things that have to be sorted out in their society. So I think there's scope for a great deal more to develop outside the frame of the show.
So there could be many more stories and books coming along.
If George Martin lives long enough.
If he lives long enough, yeah. All right. Thanks, Ms. Lang, for the interview. It was really interesting to talk to you. And thanks for having me.
Thank you for inviting me.